Mom, how's life with the $6,000 I send you every month? My millionaire son asked with a smirk as he raised his champagne glass at our family Christmas dinner. The room fell silent. I stared at him across the long oak table, convinced I had misheard. The Christmas lights reflected softly in the crystal glasses. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace behind him. Outside, fresh snow covered the grounds of his sprawling Connecticut estate. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked like the kind of holiday gathering people post on Christmas cards. But in that moment, I felt as though the floor had shifted beneath me. "What money, Ethan?" I asked quietly. The smile vanished from my son's face. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then I noticed something else. My daughter-in-law Victoria nearly dropped her wine glass. Her fingers tightened around the stem. The color drained from her face so quickly that even from the other side of the table, I could see it. Ethan laughed awkwardly at first, as if he thought I was joking. "The $6,000 a month," he said. "The money I've been sending you for the last 2 years." I looked at him, then at Victoria, then back at him again. "I've never received a single dollar," I said. The silence that followed felt heavier than the snow outside. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end of my story, and let me know where you're watching from." Even now, when I think back to that Christmas night, I can still remember the look on Ethan's face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disappointment. It was confusion. Pure confusion. As though everything he believed to be true had suddenly stopped making sense. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 72 years old. I live alone in a small 2-bedroom house outside Hartford. My husband Richard passed away 4 years ago after a long illness. Since then, life has become quieter, smaller. Some mornings I still reach for the other side of the bed before remembering that nobody is there anymore. I learned how to live with that emptiness. What I never learned was how to explain to myself why my own son seemed to drift further away every year. Ethan built a successful software company before he turned 40. Magazine interviews, business conferences, luxury vacations. He worked hard for every bit of it, and I was proud of him. But after he married Victoria 3 years ago, our relationship changed. Calls became shorter. Visits became less frequent. Holidays moved from my dining room to theirs. I told myself it was normal. Children grow up. They build lives of their own. That's what parents are supposed to want. Yet there were moments that stayed with me. Moments I couldn't quite explain. Victoria always seemed to answer questions meant for Ethan. If I invited him somewhere, she would politely decline on his behalf. If I called, she often said he was busy. It never felt openly rude, just subtle enough to make me doubt my own instincts. That Christmas evening had started beautifully. The house was decorated from floor to ceiling. Garland wrapped around the staircase. White candles flickered on every windowsill. Christmas music played softly through hidden speakers. Their guests laughed and exchanged gifts while servers moved quietly between tables carrying trays of appetizers. I remember sitting there thinking how lucky Ethan was. How successful. How happy. Then he raised his glass and asked a question that changed everything. Across the table, Victoria finally forced a smile. "Maybe there's been some misunderstanding," she said quickly. Her voice sounded different. Tight. Controlled. "I'm sure we can sort it out later." But nobody was listening to her anymore. Ethan was staring directly at me. "Mom," he said slowly, "if you never got the money, where did it go?" And for the first time that evening, I saw genuine fear appear in Victoria's eyes. Nobody seemed interested in dessert after that. The beautifully decorated Christmas table remained untouched while conversations faded into uncomfortable silence. Ethan sat motionless beside the fireplace, staring into his glass as if the answer might somehow appear there. Victoria remained unusually quiet. For a woman who normally filled every silence with polite conversation, her restraint felt almost unnatural. I watched her carefully without letting it show. Years of motherhood had taught me something important. People often reveal the most when they are trying their hardest to hide. Eventually, the evening came to an awkward end. Guests gathered their coats. Farewell hugs were exchanged. Christmas music continued to play softly through the speakers as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet everything had changed. Ethan insisted that one of his drivers take me home. During the 40-minute drive back to Hartford, neither of us spoke much. Snow drifted across the windshield under the glow of streetlights. The world outside looked peaceful. My thoughts were anything but. When the car finally pulled into my driveway, Ethan surprised me. He turned toward me before I opened the door. "Mom," he said quietly. I need you to be honest with me. Have you really never received any of that money? I looked directly into his eyes. Not $1. He nodded slowly. The expression on his face made him look 10 years younger. Not because he seemed happier, because he seemed hurt. I believe you, he said. Then he drove away. I stood in the cold for a moment before walking into my small house. The living room greeted me exactly as I had left it that morning. A modest artificial Christmas tree stood beside the window. Most of the ornaments were older than my grandchildren. Some had belonged to Richard. Others Ethan had made in elementary school. I hung my coat and turned on a lamp. The room felt quiet, familiar, safe. Yet something about it suddenly seemed different. Perhaps because for the first time in 2 years, I understood that my struggles might not have been invisible after all. I moved into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Half a gallon of milk, a few leftovers, a carton of eggs. I had become very careful with money since Richard died. Every grocery trip required planning. Every utility bill required attention. Last summer, my air conditioner broke during a heat wave. The repair estimate was nearly $1,800. I spent weeks deciding whether I could afford it. In the end, I bought 2 box fans instead. I remembered sitting at this same kitchen table months earlier with a stack of unpaid medical bills. Nothing catastrophic. Just ordinary expenses that seem to multiply as people age. Prescription refills, specialist visits, routine tests, the kind of costs nobody notices until they arrive. There had been nights when I skipped small comforts simply because I wanted an extra cushion in my checking account. Through all of it, I never asked Ethan for help. I knew he was successful, but I wanted to remain independent. Pride can be expensive. Loneliness can be expensive too. Still, I managed. Or at least I thought I had. Now a different question troubled me. If Ethan truly believed he had been sending $6,000 every month for 2 years, that meant someone had convinced him everything was working exactly as planned. I sat down at the kitchen table and began mentally retracing the past 24 months. Certain memories suddenly felt different. Birthday cards that never arrived. Documents Victoria had once offered to help organize. A conversation about changing mailing addresses after a package supposedly went missing. At the time, none of it seemed important. Now each memory felt like a puzzle piece turning slowly in my hand. Around midnight, I walked to the bedroom and opened the top drawer of my dresser. Inside sat an old photograph of Richard. He was smiling at the camera, standing beside a fishing boat during a summer vacation years ago. I looked at the picture for a long time. Something is wrong, I whispered, and I think somebody has been counting on me never noticing. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone ringing. The caller ID displayed Ethan's name. When I answered, his voice sounded exhausted. "Mom," he said, "I spent half the night reviewing old records. And I just found something that makes even less sense." My stomach tightened as I sat down at the kitchen table with the phone pressed against my ear. Ethan sounded nothing like the confident businessman the world knew. He sounded troubled. "What did you find?" I asked. I heard papers shifting on his end. Then a long breath. "Every transfer went through," he said. "Every single one. 72 payments over 2 years. The money left my accounts exactly as scheduled." I stared out the window at the snow covering my backyard. "Then somebody received it." "That is exactly the problem," he replied. "The records show confirmation notices, thank you messages, even responses that appeared to come from you." For a moment, I could not speak. "From me?" "Yes." His voice grew quieter. "Mom, there are dozens of emails." My hand tightened around the phone. I owned a computer. I checked email occasionally, but I had never written a single message thanking Ethan for monthly financial support because I had never known such support existed. "I never sent them," I said. "I swear to you." "I know," he answered immediately. The certainty in his voice surprised me. For years I had worried that distance had weakened our bond. Yet at that moment he believed me without hesitation. "There is something else," he continued. "The email address attached to the correspondence is not the one I have for you now." A cold feeling settled in my chest. "What address is it?" He read it aloud. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Not because it belonged to me, but because I had seen it before. Somewhere. Months ago. Maybe longer. After we ended the call, I walked into my small home office and turned on my computer. The machine hummed to life slowly. While it loaded, I searched through old files and paperwork stored in a cabinet beside the desk. Utility bills, insurance statements, holiday cards, tax documents. Years of ordinary life organized into neat folders. Then I found it. An old change of contact form from nearly 2 years earlier. My eyes fixed on the signature line. I remembered the day immediately. Victoria had visited unexpectedly. She claimed Ethan wanted to simplify some family records. She had arrived carrying folders and forms, speaking quickly and confidently. At the time, I barely glanced at the paperwork. I trusted her. Why would I not? She was family. Looking at the document now, I realized something unsettling. The email address listed on the form matched the address Ethan had mentioned, yet I had never used it, never logged into it, never created it. A strange chill moved through me. Suddenly, I remembered another detail. A few months after that visit, I had complained to Victoria about missing a message from Ethan regarding a family gathering. She had smiled and said technology could be confusing sometimes. Then she offered to help organize my accounts. I had thanked her. Looking back, the memory felt entirely different. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time the caller was not Ethan. It was a woman named Claire Reynolds. I recognized the name immediately. She had worked as Ethan's executive assistant for years before leaving the company. We exchanged holiday greetings before her tone became more serious. "Margaret," she said carefully, "I heard something happened at Christmas dinner." I hesitated. "News travels fast." "It does in certain circles," she replied. Then she lowered her voice. "There is something I should have mentioned a long time ago." My heart began to beat faster. "What do you mean?" There was a brief silence. "About 18 months ago, I questioned some paperwork involving your accounts. Victoria told me she was handling everything personally. I let it go because she was Ethan's wife." I closed my eyes. "Claire, what exactly are you saying?" "I am saying that something felt wrong back then. And now I think my instincts were right." The room suddenly felt smaller. Outside, snow continued to fall in slow, silent waves. Inside, another piece of the puzzle had just fallen into place. And for the first time, I began to suspect that whatever had happened was far bigger than a few missing payments. After my conversation with Claire, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, but I barely noticed. My eyes remained fixed on the snowfall beyond the window while my mind replayed the past several years. It is strange how memory works. Sometimes the truth hides inside ordinary moments. Not because it is invisible, but because we never have a reason to question what we are seeing. Now I had a reason. Suddenly dozens of small incidents felt different. I remembered a family barbecue nearly 2 years earlier. Ethan had asked whether I liked the new tablet he supposedly sent for my birthday. I had smiled politely and told him I never received one. He looked confused for only a second, before Victoria quickly explained that shipping companies made mistakes all the time. The conversation moved on. At the time, nobody thought much about it. Now I wondered whether that had been the first warning sign. Then there was the Christmas card Ethan mentioned sending the year before. He sounded disappointed when I never acknowledged it. Victoria had laughed and suggested that I must have misplaced it among my holiday mail. I believed her. Why would I not? Families are built on trust. At least they are supposed to be. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I became. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, Ethan arrived unexpectedly. His luxury SUV pulled into my driveway, and within moments he was standing in my kitchen holding a thick folder. He looked exhausted. Dark circles had formed beneath his eyes. For the first time in years, he seemed less like a successful executive and more like the little boy who used to come to me whenever something frightened him. Without saying a word, he placed the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were bank records, transfer confirmations, email printouts, and account summaries. Page after page, month after month. 2 years of documentation. I studied the papers carefully. Every transfer appeared legitimate. Every payment showed successful delivery. Every confirmation referenced the same email address I did not recognize. I had my financial team review everything this morning, Ethan said quietly. They found something else. I looked up. What? He slid another page across the table. It showed a contact authorization form. My stomach tightened immediately. The signature resembled mine. Not perfectly, but close enough that many people would never question it. "Do you remember signing this?" he asked. "No," my answer came instantly. Ethan nodded grimly. "That is what I thought." We sat in silence for several seconds. Then he said something that surprised me. Victoria was listed as an authorized helper on several account updates. The room seemed to grow still. Neither of us spoke her name for a while. We did not need to. It hung between us anyway. Finally, Ethan rubbed his forehead and stared down at the documents. I keep hoping there is another explanation. His voice sounded tired. Some misunderstanding. Some administrative error. I understood why he felt that way. Accepting the truth about a stranger is difficult. Accepting it about someone you love is far harder. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text message had arrived from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Then I opened it. The message contained only one sentence. No greeting. No signature. Just a single line. Be careful where you look next. Some records were never meant to be found. I showed the message to Ethan. His expression changed immediately. The exhaustion disappeared. In its place was something else. Determination. He reached for the phone and read the message again. Then he slowly set it back on the table. "Mom," he said, "I think somebody knows we are asking questions." After Ethan left that evening, I locked the front door and checked the windows twice before going to bed. The anonymous message stayed in my mind long after the house grew quiet. It was not the kind of threat people see in movies. In some ways, that made it more unsettling. Whoever sent it knew enough to understand that questions were being asked. That meant somebody was paying attention. The next morning, Ethan called before 8 o'clock. His voice sounded calmer than it had the day before, but I could hear determination beneath the surface. "I have someone reviewing the records independently," he said. "Not from my company. Not connected to anyone we know." I agreed that it was wise. At this point, trust felt like a luxury neither of us could afford. Around noon, I drove to my local bank branch. The building was small and familiar. I had been banking there for nearly 20 years. The manager, Susan Whitaker, recognized me immediately and invited me into her office. I explained that I needed help reviewing historical account information. Nothing unusual at first. Then I showed her copies of the documents Ethan had provided. As she compared the records, her expression gradually changed. She adjusted her glasses and studied the pages again. "Margaret," she said carefully, "there is something here that does not make sense." My heart began to pound. She turned her monitor slightly, so I could see. Several account notifications connected to my profile had been redirected 2 years earlier. The destination was not my home address. It was a private mailbox service located nearly 40 miles away. I stared at the screen. I never authorized that. According to our records, somebody submitted documentation requesting the change. She paused. The signature was accepted at the time. I already knew what that meant. Another document. Another signature. Another piece of a puzzle that was becoming harder to ignore. Before leaving, I requested copies of everything available. Susan promised to prepare the files by the following day. As I walked back to my car, snow crunched beneath my shoes. The cold January air stung my cheeks. Yet my thoughts remained focused on one question. Why would anyone go to such lengths simply to redirect correspondence? That evening, Ethan called again. This time he had news. "Claire remembered something important," he said. "About a year ago, she questioned a series of reimbursements connected to a consulting company." I sat forward in my chair. "What kind of consulting company?" "That is the interesting part," Ethan replied. "The company barely existed. It had no public website, no employees listed, almost no business activity. I felt a chill despite the warmth inside my living room. And there was a brief silence. The company received money from an account connected to the same mailbox address the bank showed you today." I closed my eyes. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The coincidence was becoming impossible to dismiss. Somewhere behind all these records, all these redirects, all these missing communications, a pattern was emerging. Then Ethan told me one final detail. The consulting company had been established just weeks before the first $6,000 payment was ever sent. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think we finally found where the trail begins." For the next several days, Ethan and I followed separate paths that somehow kept leading to the same place. He worked through financial records with the patience of an investigator assembling evidence. I focused on the personal details, the forgotten conversations, and small inconsistencies that had once seemed harmless. The consulting company continued to bother me. I could not explain why. Perhaps because it felt less like a business and more like a doorway hiding something behind it. 3 days after my visit to the bank, Susan called and told me the requested copies were ready. I drove over immediately. The folder she handed me was thicker than I expected. Inside were account change forms, notification requests, mailing instructions, and archive correspondence logs. Most of it looked routine. Then I found a page that made me stop breathing for a moment. Attached to one of the authorization updates was an emergency contact number. It was not mine. It was not Ethan's. It belonged to Victoria. I read the document twice. Then a third time. There was no mistake. Somehow her number had been attached to records connected to my account history. When I showed the page to Susan, she frowned. That should never have happened without direct authorization, she said. At least not under normal circumstances. I thanked her and drove home with the folder beside me on the passenger seat. Snowbanks lined the roads. The sky hung low and gray over Connecticut. Everything outside looked frozen. Inside my mind, however, pieces were moving faster than ever. That evening, Ethan arrived carrying another stack of documents. We spread everything across my dining room table. The same table where Richard and I had shared thousands of meals. The same table where Ethan had once done his homework after school. Now it had become our investigation headquarters. For nearly 2 hours, we compared dates, transfers, email activity, mailing changes, corporate filings. Every new page seemed connected to the last. Finally, Ethan pointed at a date on one of the documents. "Look at this," he said. I leaned closer. The consulting company had been registered exactly 12 days before Victoria requested assistance managing certain household communications on Ethan's behalf. Another coincidence. Except by now, there were too many coincidences to ignore. Then Ethan received a call. The number belonged to the independent forensic accountant he had hired. He listened silently for several minutes while taking notes. I watched his expression change. First curiosity, then disbelief, then something heavier. When he ended the call, he remained silent for a moment. "What is it?" I asked. Ethan slowly lowered the phone. The accountant traced the ownership records. My heart began to race. And he looked directly at me. The consulting company was not owned by a stranger. The room felt very still. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the windows. "Who owned it?" I asked quietly. Ethan swallowed. "A trust." He paused. And the trustee listed on the original formation documents was Victoria's younger brother. I stared at him. Until that moment, every discovery had suggested a possibility. This was different. This was a connection. A real one. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then Ethan opened another folder and removed a photograph from inside. It showed a small office building in another state. An ordinary place. Nothing remarkable. Yet according to the accountant, that address appeared repeatedly throughout the financial trail. Ethan placed the photograph on the table between us. "The accountant is sending more information tomorrow," he said. But he told me one thing before we ended the call. "What was that?" Ethan looked down at the photograph. He said if the records are accurate, the missing money may be only part of the story. The following afternoon, Ethan and I sat across from each other in my dining room waiting for the accountant's full report. Neither of us said much. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock Richard had bought decades earlier. I found myself watching the second hand move around the dial, wondering how many moments in life seem ordinary until the truth finally catches up to them. Shortly after 3 o'clock, Ethan's laptop chimed. The report had arrived. He opened the file immediately. Page after page filled the screen. Corporate registrations, banking records, transaction histories, ownership structures. At first, much of it seemed technical. Then certain details began to stand out. The consulting company was only one layer. Behind it sat another business entity. Behind that one sat another. Each organization appeared designed to hide where money was ultimately going. The accountant had spent days tracing the path. By the time he reached the final destination, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Ethan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. "How bad is it?" I asked quietly. He looked at me before answering. "Worse than I expected." He turned the screen toward me. According to the report, funds had moved through multiple accounts before eventually reaching investments connected to Victoria's family network. Not just her brother. Several relatives appeared throughout the records. Some names I recognized. Others I did not. What struck me most was not the amount of money. It was the level of planning involved. This was not a single mistake. It was not a misunderstanding. It had continued month after month, year after year. As we continued reading, another discovery emerged. The redirected payments were only one part of the scheme. Several gifts Ethan believed he had sent me never arrived either. Holiday packages, electronics, gift cards, charitable donations made in my name. Small items compared to the monthly transfers, but together they painted a painful picture. I remembered each conversation. Every awkward moment when Ethan seemed disappointed that I never acknowledged a gift. Every time Victoria smoothly explained away the confusion. Looking back, I realized those misunderstandings had slowly created distance between my son and me. Neither of us knew we were being pushed apart. We simply assumed the other had changed. That realization hurt more than any financial loss. Around 5 o'clock, Ethan received another call. This time it came from Claire. He placed the conversation on speaker. "I found something in an archived email account," she said. "I almost missed it." Ethan exchanged a glance with me. "What is it?" Claire took a breath. "There were repeated messages over the past 2 years suggesting your mother preferred less contact. Several requests asking staff not to bother her with updates or invitations." My chest tightened. "I never wrote anything like that." "I know," Claire replied gently. "That is why I kept digging." Ethan's jaw tightened as she continued. The messages appeared to come from the same alternate email address already connected to the missing funds. In other words, whoever controlled that account had not only redirected money, they had been quietly influencing communication as well. Family gatherings, company events, invitations, information. Little by little, opportunities for connection had disappeared. After the call ended, silence filled the room. Ethan stared out the window toward the snow-covered yard. "I thought you were pulling away from me," he said softly. I looked at my son and saw genuine regret in his eyes. "And I thought you had become too busy for your mother." Neither of us spoke after that. We did not need to. The truth was painful enough. Then Ethan opened the final section of the report. As his eyes moved across the page, his expression changed once again. This time it was not disbelief. It was shock. Slowly, he looked up at me. "Mom," he said, "there is a meeting scheduled next week involving those accounts." He paused before continuing. "And according to these records, Victoria does not know we have found any of this." The next week moved slowly. On the surface, life appeared normal. Snow continued to fall across Connecticut. People returned to work after the holidays. Stores removed their Christmas decorations. Yet beneath that ordinary routine, Ethan and I were preparing for something neither of us could have imagined a month earlier. The meeting identified in the accountant's report was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at a private office building in New York. According to the records, representatives connected to the consulting company planned to review investment activity and future transactions. More importantly, Victoria was expected to attend. Ethan made a decision that surprised me. He did not confront her. He did not accuse her. Instead, he acted exactly as he always had. Business meetings, family dinners, routine conversations. If Victoria suspected anything, she never showed it. The night before the meeting, Ethan came to my house carrying a leather portfolio. We sat at the dining room table reviewing documents one final time. Transfer histories, corporate filings, communication logs, copies of redirected account information. The evidence had become impossible to ignore. Yet I felt strangely calm. Perhaps because the uncertainty was finally ending. For weeks, questions had dominated every conversation. Tomorrow would bring answers. Thursday arrived cold and gray. Shortly after noon, Ethan called. "Everything is set," he said. "The accountant, the attorney, and Claire are all here." I looked out the window at the bare trees swaying in the winter wind. "Be careful," I told him. He laughed softly. "Mom, we are attending a meeting, not starting a war." Even so, I sensed the tension beneath his humor. Hours passed. I tried reading. I tried watching television. Neither worked. Around 4 o'clock, my phone finally rang. It was Ethan. His voice sounded completely different. Not angry. Not emotional. Certain. "It is over," he said. I sat down immediately. "What happened?" There was a brief pause. The meeting began normally. Investment reports. Financial projections. Routine discussions. Then our attorney started asking questions. I listened carefully as Ethan described the scene. At first, the participants appeared confident, prepared, comfortable. Then the documents came out. One by one. Mailing records. Account authorizations. Corporate ownership filings. Archived communications. The atmosphere changed quickly. Every explanation created another contradiction. Every answer led to another document. Eventually, there were no explanations left. Ethan told me that several people left the room looking stunned. Others refused to speak entirely. And Victoria? I asked quietly. Another pause followed. She realized we knew. I closed my eyes. For months, perhaps years, she had believed the story was secure, hidden behind paperwork and assumptions. Now that illusion had disappeared. Ethan explained that the attorney presented the final ownership records near the end of the meeting. The chain of companies, the family connections, the redirected assets, everything. No dramatic speeches, no shouting, just facts, clear and unavoidable. What did she say? I asked. Ethan sighed heavily. Not much. There was not much left to say. We spoke for nearly an hour after that. When the call finally ended, I remained seated at the kitchen table staring at the fading afternoon light. Relief should have been the dominant emotion. Instead, I felt something more complicated. Sadness. Not because the truth had emerged. Because of what the truth revealed. Trust takes years to build and only moments to lose. Later that evening, another call came from Ethan. This time his voice carried a different tone. "Mom," he said, "there is one more thing you need to know." My hand tightened around the phone. "What is it?" The accountant finished tracing every transfer. He paused. "And the final number is much larger than either of us expected." The following morning, Ethan arrived at my house carrying no folders, no reports, and no stacks of evidence. For the first time since Christmas, his hands were empty. Yet somehow the weight he carried seemed heavier than ever. We sat together in the kitchen while sunlight reflected off the snow outside. Neither of us rushed to speak. Some conversations need silence before they can begin. Finally, Ethan looked at me and exhaled slowly. The final total was $864,000. The number hung in the air between us. I stared into my coffee cup. Nearly $900,000. More money than I had ever imagined receiving. More money than I would have needed. Yet strangely, hearing the amount did not create anger. By then, I had moved beyond the money itself. The deeper loss had been something else entirely. 2 years of distance. 2 years of misunderstandings. 2 years spent believing my son had slowly stopped caring while he believed I was rejecting every effort he made to help. Ethan seemed to understand that. "I keep thinking about all the times I should have noticed," he said quietly. "All the conversations that never made sense." I shook my head. "You trusted someone you loved." He looked away. "So did you." Neither of us could argue with that. Over the next several weeks, life gradually settled into a new rhythm. Attorneys handled legal matters. Accountants completed their reviews. Financial institutions corrected records and restored proper account information. I stayed out of most of those discussions. At 72 years old, I had little interest in spending my remaining years focused on paperwork and disputes. What mattered to me was something far simpler. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan showed up carrying grocery bags. The following week, he helped replace the aging water heater in my basement. A few days later, we had dinner together at a small restaurant near the river. Nothing extravagant, nothing dramatic. Just a mother and her son sharing time that had been missing for far too long. Those ordinary moments meant more to me than any financial recovery ever could. One evening in early spring, we sat on my back porch watching the last patches of snow disappear from the yard. The air smelled fresh and clean. Birds had returned to the trees. Winter was finally giving way to warmer days. Ethan looked out across the lawn before speaking. "You know," he said, "I spent years building businesses because I thought success would protect the people I care about." I smiled faintly. "And what did you learn?" He laughed softly. "That paying attention matters more than money." I nodded because he was right. Wealth can solve many problems. It cannot replace trust. It cannot repair neglected relationships. It cannot tell you when somebody is quietly standing between you and the people you love. As the sun began to set, I found myself thinking back to Christmas dinner. One simple question had started everything. A single unexpected moment had exposed years of hidden deception. At the time, it felt like my world was falling apart. Looking back now, I see something different. The truth did not destroy my family. The lies did. The truth simply gave us a chance to rebuild what should never have been broken. Later that night, before Ethan left, he stopped at the front door and turned toward me. "I am sorry, Mom." The apology was simple, honest, long overdue. I stepped forward and hugged him. "I know," I said. After he drove away, I stood on the porch for a while watching the evening sky darken above the neighborhood. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. Not because every problem had been solved, not because every loss had been recovered, But because the confusion was finally gone, the distance was finally gone, the truth had found its way home. And in the end, that was worth far more than $864,000.